Argentina may have just found its next Messi, and he was not even born in Argentina. His name is Steven Kiki Ramos. He is 17 years old. He was born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. He grew up in the streets of Buenos Aires, and on July 28, 2026, he became the first Haitian-born player in the entire history of Argentine football to wear the albiceleste at any level, in any category, across any age group the AFA has ever fielded. That is not a number invented to make this sound bigger than it is. It is verified. It is documented. It is now permanently written into the record books of a football nation that takes its history more seriously than almost any other on the planet. And by the time this is over, you will understand why the coaches at Velez Sarsfield started comparing a teenager in the 6th division to Vinicius Jr. But this story does not begin on a football pitch. It begins with a disaster. January 12, 2010. A 7.0 magnitude earthquake ripped through Port-au-Prince in seconds. More than 200,000 people died. Hospitals collapsed. Schools crumbled. Entire neighborhoods that had been standing that morning were rubble by the afternoon. It remains one of the deadliest natural disasters this century has produced. And buried somewhere inside that devastation was an infant, just months old, born into a family that was suddenly fighting simply to survive in a city that had been broken apart overnight. You do not choose where you are born. You do not choose the chaos that surrounds you the moment you arrive in the world. But every so often, in the middle of that chaos, someone steps in and changes the direction of a life completely. For baby Steven, that someone was an Argentine family. Out of the wreckage of the earthquake, he was adopted at 8 months old and carried more than 6,000 kilometers from Port-au-Prince to Buenos Aires. A new country, a new language, a new life that he would have no memory of choosing, but that would come to define everything he became. Most people would stop the story there. Haitian orphan adopted by an Argentine family. A moving headline, but not the real one. The real story is what happened next. Fast forward 6 years. Little Steven is just another kid in the neighborhoods of Buenos Aires, doing what practically every Argentine child does, chasing a battered ball around the potrero with no shoes and no audience and no awareness that anyone is watching. Nobody scouts 6-year-olds. Nobody is filming him. There is no algorithm, no highlight reel, no moment being captured for a future documentary. There is just a neighbor, a die-hard Velez Sarsfield supporter who watches this kid play and sees something the others around him are missing. Speed that children his age simply do not have. An instinct for where the ball is going before it has left someone else's foot. And he does the one thing that ends up changing everything. He tells the family to take the boy to a trial. Think about how fragile that single moment is. If that neighbor supports a different club, he says nothing. If the family decides it is too much trouble, they never make the trip. If the timing is slightly different, nobody ever sees what this child can do. There is no debut, no record, no headline, just a kid who loved football and grew up without the world ever knowing his name. But they do go. And Velez Sarsfield, one of the most respected and most demanding youth academies in Argentine football, watches him for a session and says yes. From that trial forward, Steven Ramos is a Velez player, not a guest, not a project, a product of one of the most serious development systems on the continent, moving through the age groups the way every genuine prospect moves, quietly, consistently, year after year, category after category. Building something that the people inside the club can see is different from what normally passes through their gates. And here is the detail that tells you everything about the player he was becoming. Inside the academy, they stopped using his real name. They started calling him Kiki, and that nickname was not random, and it was not affectionate in the way nicknames sometimes are. At Velez, they started calling him Kiki because of how he played. Vertical, explosive, a straight line toward goal with pace that defenders could not account for, using the positioning they would use against any other forward. The traits people used to describe Kylian Mbappe in his early years at Monaco. Let that land properly. Before Kiki Ramos ever pulled on an Argentina youth jersey, the people who watched him train every single day, the coaches and staff who had seen hundreds of young players move through this system, were already reaching for the name of one of the best players alive to describe his running style. That is not manufactured YouTube content. That is a nickname earned through daily work on a training pitch by a child who did not know anyone was making the comparison. By the time he reached the 6th division, which is Velez's under-17 level, the numbers matched the reputation the nickname had created. 12 goals in the national youth tournament, 4 goals in a single match against Atletico de Rafaela, the kind of performance that makes everyone watching check whether they are looking at the right player's details. A goal against Boca Juniors, that Boca, in a performance reportedly decisive enough to convince the national coaching staff that this 17-year-old was ready to be seen at international level. Scouts from clubs circling Velez looking for the next generation of Argentine talent started dropping another name alongside Mbappe, Vinicius Jr., not because Kiki Ramos is already operating at that level. He is 17 years old and has not played a minute of senior football, but because the raw physical profile, the speed over short distances, the body shape, the relationship with the ball when running at full pace, carries unmistakable similarities to the kind of player Vinicius was when the people closest to him knew what was coming before the rest of the world did. Most redemption stories would tie a neat bow right here. Kid survives earthquake, gets adopted, joins famous club, starts scoring goals. Story complete, but real life does not move in straight lines, and Kiki Ramos's next chapter turned brutal very quickly. Right at the moment he was hitting his stride and climbing toward the kind of visibility that changes a young player's trajectory permanently, injuries arrived, and they did not cost him a few weeks. They wiped out almost an entire season. Anyone who has played sport at any level knows exactly what that feels like from the inside. You do not get injured for the highlight reel. You get injured watching your teammates keep playing without you, while kids your age keep developing, keep getting seen, keep getting talked about, and you are sitting on the bench watching your window close before it properly opened. For most young players, that is the year the dream quietly ends. Not dramatically. It just fades until one day you realize the path you were on no longer exists. Kiki Ramos refused to accept that. 2026 arrives, and with it, the version of Ramos that Velez had always believed was underneath everything. Healthy, sharp, scoring again. Playing with the directness and the physicality that had made people reach for those comparisons in the first place. The lost season had not broken him. It had, by most accounts from the people around him, made him harder to discourage. Then, in June 2026, the call came in the most ordinary way imaginable. Ramos was sitting in an online mathematics class, phone beside him, when his personal coach sent a message. Diego Placente, head coach of Argentina's under-17 national team, had called him up. Not a trial invitation, not a maybe, a real call-up. Training alongside 2 of his Velez teammates, Facundo Salinas and Benjamin Vallejo, and the best young players in a country where producing elite football talent is not an ambition but an expectation. By his own account, Ramos never saw the call coming. The nerves hit the moment he understood what it meant. By his second training session with the group, he had made himself belong. Then, on July 28th, 2026, everything arrived at once. Everything that neighbor had spotted at age 6. Everything Velez had built across a decade of development. Everything that had survived an earthquake, a 6,000-kilometer journey, and a season stolen by injury. Argentina under-17 versus Ecuador. On paper, a friendly. Preparation for the FIFA Under-17 World Cup heading to Qatar in November. In reality, the exact moment Argentine football rewrote its own record books. Diego Placente sent out his strongest lineup. Argentina dominated. Goals from Benjamin Vallejo and Facundo Salinas put the Albiceleste 2-1 up, with Mateo Villanueva pulling one back for Ecuador. Then in the second half, substitute number 22 stepped onto the pitch wearing the Argentina crest. Steven Kiki Ramos became the first Haitian-born player to ever represent the Argentina national team at any level, in any category, across the entire history of the country's football. Not a clickbait headline. A verified historical fact that is now permanently part of the record and cannot be taken away regardless of whatever comes next. Argentina won 2-1. But for Kiki Ramos, the scoreline was almost beside the point. He did not just play a friendly. He redrew the map of who gets to claim that shirt. So is Kiki Ramos Argentina's next Messi? Honestly, nobody knows yet, and anyone who tells you otherwise is guessing. One substitute appearance in an under-17 friendly does not crown anyone anything. He has not played a single competitive minute for Velez's first team. He has never stepped onto a senior international pitch. He is 17 years old, and Argentine football has watched dozens of prospects described in exactly these terms disappear before they ever became what the early scouting reports suggested they could be. But here is what he already owns that most 17-year-olds never will: a documented scoring record at one of the most respected academies in South American football, a physical profile that scouts are benchmarking against elite senior talents, the mental resilience to claw back from a season that took everything from him and produce performances good enough to earn a national team call-up immediately after. And now, a permanent line in the history books that no injury, no setback, no difficult year can ever erase. The next destination is the Under-17 World Cup in Qatar this November and December. If Placente keeps faith in him, that is the moment the entire football world, not just Argentina, finally sees Kiki Ramos playing on a stage that matches what the people closest to him have been watching for years. The debut is done, the record is set. The real test starts now. Drop your prediction in the comments. Does Kiki Ramos become a senior Argentina international within the next 3 years? Or does this story stay at youth level? I want to know what you think. Subscribe, because when he steps onto that Under-17 World Cup pitch in Qatar, this channel will be the first place breaking it down completely.